Shalom, shalom, and welcome, friends. The Bible cover to cover, and I am your host, Donnie Wallner. In today's episode, we will again do a character study, and the person we will zoom in, I suppose, will be a leper, and his tremendous faith and confidence he had in Jesus. Like in my previous episode, like the woman that bled for 12 years. I didn't mention that how often we simply read over details in the gospel, encounters like these, maybe thinking that this is only just a miracle. The biblical authors never intended more or less from this story. But there's always profound meaning, theological meaning, the biblical authors are trying to convey to us through these seemingly simple stories. And again, in this story from Mark 1, there is no exception. I guess it'll be a continuation on the theme of spiritual and physical resurrection. The coming of the kingdom of heaven down to earth is a kingdom that will ultimately restore everything into a perfect state in everlasting glory. And so in the Gospels, in the ministry of Jesus, the people witnessed a foretaste of what is to come when Christ does return again to restore all things. And so the theme today will be around leprosy, what the perception was towards leprosy in the first century, and how the Bible used leprosy to symbolize sin. So let me read Mark 1:40-45, and then we'll closely examine this portion of the text. And a leper came to Jesus, beseeching him, and falling on his knees before him, and saying, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." Moved with compassion, Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, and said to him, "I am willing, be cleansed." Immediately the leprosy left him, and he was cleansed. And he sternly warned him, and immediately sent him away. And he said to him, "See that you say nothing to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer for yourself cleansing what Moses commanded, as a testimony to them." But he went out and began to proclaim it freely and to spread the news around, to such an extent that Jesus could no longer publicly enter a city, but stay out in unpopulated areas, and they were coming to him from everywhere. So the backdrop to this section is from Leviticus 13. And in Leviticus 13:46 it states, "He shall remain unclean all the days during which he has the infection. He is unclean. He shall live alone. His dwelling shall be outside the camp." So this is an important verse to remember in light of the leper's experience up to the point when Jesus heals him. And I want to examine the significance of this disease, like I said, in the first century perspective and the biblical perspective of its greater theological significance. So first off, the word there being used for leprosy could be a more general term of many different kinds of skin diseases. But I think here in this case we can argue that it could very well be the modern day leprosy that is called hands disease. And the reason I say that in the portion of Mark 1, which I read, in verse 45 it says, "But he went out and began to proclaim it freely and to spread the news around," that is, to spread about his healing, to such an extent that Jesus could no longer publicly enter a city, but stay out in unpopulated areas, and they were coming to him from everywhere. It's important to note that a person with such severe skin disease, there was no cure at the time. The only cure believed was from God, a divine cure. So sufferers of this disease in the Bible were regarded as the living dead. There is no cure. Your skin was white as one being dead. Like I've mentioned already, it was considered an incurable disease except through divine healing. An example from the Bible would be in Numbers 12:12. Oh, do not let her be like one dead, whose flesh is half eaten away when he comes from his mother's womb. So it's referring to this skin disease, this leprosy. Aaron said that to Moses about his sister Mary, and we will cover that in a bit. So culturally, leprosy was seen as a judgment on particularly egregious sins and seen as God's way of exiling the wicked. So being healed and able to return to the community was looked upon as this person must have repented and found forgiveness from God. And there is a biblical precedence for such a belief. And we will turn our attention then to Numbers 12:1-15 for context as to why a first century Jew would have had this perception that leprosy was a divine punishment in order to remove sin from the camp or community. So in Numbers 12:1-15, Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman whom he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman. And they said, Has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also? And the Lord heard it. Now the man Moses was very meek, more than all the people who were on the face of the earth. And suddenly the Lord said to Moses and to Aaron and Miriam, Come out, you three, to the tent of meeting. And the three of them came out. And the Lord came down in a pillar of cloud and stood at the entrance of the tent and called Aaron and Miriam, and they both came forward. And he said, Hear my words. If there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, make myself known to him in a vision. I speak with him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. With him I speak mouth to mouth, clearly, and not in riddles, and he beholds the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? And the anger of the Lord was kindled against them, and he departed. When the cloud removed from over the tent, behold, Miriam was leprous, like snow. And Aaron turned toward Miriam, and behold, she was leprous. And Aaron said to Moses, O my Lord, do not punish us because we have done foolishly and have sinned. Let her not be as one dead, whose flesh is half eaten away when he comes out of his mother's womb. And Moses cried to the Lord, O God, please heal her, please. But the Lord said to Moses, If her father had but spit in her face, should she not be ashamed 7 days? Let her be shut outside the camp 7 days, and after that she may be brought in again. So Miriam was shut outside the camp 7 days, and the people did not set out on the march till Miriam was brought in again. So you can see from reading this text that it's easy for the first century Jewish person to come to the conclusion that when somebody contracted leprosy in any way, it was a divine punishment on that person, and that person was forced outside the camp outside the community. They're outside the community of believers. Miriam was punished with this leprosy, but Aaron was not. How is that fair? And some people will be critical towards that the Bible and that the God of the Bible picks on women and favors men. But when we consider this a little bit more carefully, Miriam was only leprous for 7 days. The question then is, did God favor Aaron over Miriam, even though Aaron sinned just as much as Miriam? Well, Miriam was only sick for 7 days, and after 7 days she was healed of the leprosy. God healed her, and she was able to return to the camp. To be healed and able to return to the camp is significant. Signifies that the person was forgiven by God, and that's powerful. But for Aaron, I think he received the worst punishment, even though God did not punish him with leprosy. He had to live for the rest of his days, because look what the text says when he looked at his sister Miriam. He was in anguish and pleaded with Moses that Moses would intercede on her behalf. To see his sister suffer in such a way, it was terrible for Aaron. But again, like I said, Miriam was restored, was healed, and brought back into the camp. But what about Aaron? I would argue that Aaron, for the rest of his life, carried this burden with him. He did not experience the same kind of forgiveness and restoration that Miriam received. I believe that he was full of guilt and must have felt responsible for dragging his sister into this predicament. But anyways, going back to the story in Mark. So in verse 40 it says, "A leper came to Jesus beseeching him, and falling on his knees before him and saying, 'If you are willing, you can make me clean.'" What a striking faith the leper had. Note that the leper doesn't say he believed Jesus was able, but expressed with great confidence that Jesus is able to heal him. "You can make me clean." But he wasn't sure if Christ was willing to heal him. Now I want to challenge us all with this. How often do we have this backwards, where we have great confidence that Jesus is willing to cleanse us, but very little faith that he actually could? We might argue that of course we believe Jesus could heal and restore me. But does this truly come from the heart? Paul in Romans 10:9-10 wrote this, "Because if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For with the heart one believes and is justified, and with the mouth one confesses and is saved." See, it's not merely confessing with the mouth. It is believing with the heart that justifies and saves us. And in the same way, the leper, you can see in his statement, he believed with all his heart that Jesus can make him clean, but wasn't sure if Jesus is willing. And I think we often fail to approach Christ in such a way when we need healing and restoration in our own lives, physically, mentally, spiritually. Do we truly believe that he can? But do we realize that maybe God will not be willing? See, it's not that God doesn't want us to be restored, but there's times when God allows us to remain in a certain circumstance He could heal us, but he chooses not to. And do we accept that? I would suggest that for the leper, when he said, if you are willing, believing wholeheartedly that Jesus could undoubtedly heal him, it almost seems like he's already accepted it if Jesus said he is not willing. So in verse 41, it says, moved with compassion. That is Jesus. Only Mark records Jesus' emotional reaction to the leper's desperate plight. And it says Jesus touched him. Unlike rabbis who avoided lepers lest they become ceremonially defiled, Jesus expressed his compassion with a physical gesture. So Jesus touching the leper was followed by an immediate cleansing of him, emphasizing that Jesus' spirit of holiness is more powerful than the uncleanness generated by the skin disease, compared to what is said in Leviticus 13-14. So rather than Jesus becoming unclean, he makes the leper clean. So the Levitical law states that if a person touches another person that has leprosy, not only is the leper rendered unclean, but the clean person who has now touched the leper is also rendered unclean and has to go through the entire cleansing ritual stated in Leviticus. So Jesus demonstrates he transcends the great prophets in the Old Testament when he commanded the disease to leave the leper. So Jesus, being moved with compassion, ignored the Levitical law, reached out to touch him, and in the Greek, he used one word, be cleansed. So Moses had to plead with God that his sister Miriam be healed from the leprosy. Elisha kept his distance from Naaman, again because leprosy was a contagious disease, and the priest could only pronounce on the cure after a person had been healed. But here Jesus, by his own power and authority, moved with compassion, touched and commanded the leper to be cleansed. So why did Jesus say to the leper as a testimony to them? At one time the priest would have rendered the leper officially unclean, and now it was necessary, according to the Levitical law, for the now cured leper to be officially announced clean by the priest in order to be once again fully reinstated into the community. This was as a testimony. Like I've mentioned already, the priest could only declare a person unclean or clean, no more or no less. It was the power and authority of Jesus that truly rendered the man clean. Jesus did not command the leper to go and see a priest to satisfy God and the law, but rather for the sake of the man, so he can be accepted back into the community. Also, at the same time, the man's healing became a testimony to the temple priests of Jesus' healing power, which, again, was believed that such a disease can only be divinely cured. In the original Greek, Jesus only used one word that is translated as be healed or be cleansed, expressing the power and authority Jesus had both over the physical and the spiritual realm. Just prior to that, Mark records Jesus casting out many demons. So let us read what the leper had to do once he went to the temple to be declared clean by the priest. In Leviticus 14:4-8 we read, "The priest shall command them to take for him who is to be cleansed 2 live clean birds, and cedar wood, and scarlet yarn, and hyssop. And the priest shall command them to kill one of the birds in an earthenware vessel over fresh water. He shall take the live bird with the cedar wood and the scarlet yarn and the hyssop, and dip them and the live bird in the blood of the bird that was killed over the fresh water. And he shall sprinkle it 7 times on him who is to be cleansed of the leprous disease. Then he shall pronounce him clean, and shall let the living bird go into the open field. And he who is to be cleansed shall wash his clothes, and shave off all his hair, and bathe himself in water, and he shall be clean. And after that he may come into the camp, but live outside his tent 7 days." So let's examine now the whole theological perspective and the intent of Mark even using this story in his gospel. So from a very early period among the Hebrews, the whole nation's perspective towards leprosy was a symbol of sin. And according to the Bible as well, it was considered loathsome, spreading, and incurable. So leprosy is a powerful demonstration for sin and its effect on an entire community if not dealt with appropriately. Like a little leaven in a lump of dough will eventually infect the whole lump, leaven being yeast, leprosy is contagious and could infect others in the community and continue to spread. So separating the yeast from the unleavened dough, or the removing of the leper from the community, ensures that the infection, sin, then spread. So the greater significance in the biblical narrative is leprosy was synonymous to sin. And so again I want to emphasize that what's amazing here in this gospel account, the opposite occurred when Jesus touched the leper. And this is the point that the gospel writers want to drive home. Like leprosy, sin is also extremely contagious, and if not dealt with, the pervasiveness of sin will spread not only in the individual, but will spread throughout the entire community. And this is precisely what the scriptures want to convey us, readers today, is to view this as an example of sin. Here Jesus, Son of God, the promised Messiah, has the power and the authority to reverse that, not only to heal this physical disease, but to demonstrate that he can reverse sin, because leprosy being so closely connected and synonymous in the mind of the first century to sin, that Jesus healing this leper is a powerful testimony to the temple and the priests and the people. That is why they came in droves, and Jesus had to escape to a more private place because of what leper was associated with. And here you have this prophet, this teacher, this rabbi, who reversed this incurable disease. And therefore, the significance behind that demonstrated, because the leper was healed, cleansed, it must also mean that he is forgiven from whatever he's done to offend God in the first place. So the greater significance here would be that sin being so pervasive, Jesus becomes the only means by which this curse can be reversed and blotted out. Isn't this amazing news? Isn't this the good news? Jesus told the leper after he was cleansed to basically keep it quiet. But what does it say here? But he went out and began to proclaim. The word for gospel and good news in the Greek literally means proclaim. So he went out and proclaimed the gospel, the good news, and he spread it. It says, but he went out and began to proclaim it freely. Jesus did not press him. Jesus did not put a condition on him that if I clean you, you better go out and tell everyone who I am and what I did. And Jesus told him to be quiet. But the man could not contain the good news. Again, isn't this convicting to us? Or it should be. What has Christ done in your life? How much has he transformed you? And like the leper, do you just have this? Are you overcome with such joy and such gratitude that you cannot contain yourself and you go out and you proclaim it freely, not done by force, but you proclaim it freely to spread the news around? And it says to such an extent that Jesus could no longer publicly enter a city. I mean, this was something amazing. That had no hope has now been healed and will be restored back into the community. Have you been touched by Christ? And let me tell you, whatever it is you've done in terms of sinful choices, we've all been there. Or maybe you're still there. Maybe you're unclean like this leper. But remember, this leper disregarded the Levitical law in terms of coming to Christ. He believed wholeheartedly that he can come to Christ just as he is. Where other rabbis and teachers, they would have never even touched him with a 10-foot pole. I think there was this law that you had to stand a certain distance away from everyone else. Some like 50 paces. I'm not sure now. But also, when you entered and when you drew closer to other people, you had to shout, "Leper." So it was an extremely shameful thing. An experience. Being shunned by the community, exiled, and then having to proclaim wherever you went, where other people were, to shout out to make sure everyone knows that you have this disease. But here this leper came to Christ, wholeheartedly believing that he can be healed by him, and asking Jesus if he is willing. And Jesus will be moved by compassion if we do that, if we bring our sins. So what I want to stress here and encourage you, come as you are and ask Christ. And know this, that if he touches you, you will not render Jesus unclean. His holiness is way more contagious and powerful than this leprosy, this sin. Just like he said to this leper, "I am willing, be cleansed," he will say to you. So don't try to change in order to come to him. Come to him and he will change, transform, and restore you. And what does restoration look like? We are delivered from sin. We are free. And this allows us to enter back into the community of believers, into the Father's house. This is what redemption looks like. The Father has a longing and a desire that everyone returns back into his Father's house. You can read that in the parable of the prodigal son. the overwhelming joy the father had when finally the son returned home. Without hesitation, the father ran towards him, grabbed him and held him in his arms, and exchanged the son's filthy rags, that is our sin, and put on him new clothes, clothes of righteousness, his righteousness, and the great celebration he set up for the son. And the gospel says that if one lost soul is found, all heaven rejoices. So come to him as you are. Believe in your heart in the promise of the gospel of peace. Open up, receive it, accept Christ into your life, and without the shadow of a doubt, healing will come. Restoration will take place. You will be transformed into his image and his likeness. Anyways, friends, I hope this was insightful and encouraging, and may the peace of Christ be upon you all. Have a wonderful day.